So I'm supposed to ask Jeremy the first question, and you know, after hearing him speak, I have a profound heaviness of just exactly what we're facing, and I think probably a lot of us have been feeling this, if not since January, at least since November, or probably even before that. So I guess, you know, let's maybe start with that. You know, I believe very strongly in building people power and coalitions of resistance. I now live in Texas, and the resistance in Texas is very strong, very encouraged by how I'm seeing that all over the country. But we're going to face bigger issues than we've ever faced before, and we're going to have people who are trying to fight this fight while losing their health insurance and seeing their family members get deported. And, you know, I guess what I want to know is, how are we supposed to keep up the fight when the fight is so massive? What do you say to that, Jeremy? Just stand over here. Sorry to give you such a big. Also, I don't know where I'm supposed to go. Go over here.
Churches are always very awkward.
Yeah, I know I'm not supposed to go over there.
Do not.
Be right here. Be right here.
And steer clear of the sacristy. I mean, my first answer to that is I'm not so arrogant as to say I have the answer. You know, because I'll just say on a personal level, I've really been, I've been educated, and I've learned a tremendous amount from the movements of people that rose up to oppose police killings of black men in this country, and black women in this country, and immigrants in this country, and you know, the broader banner that is often used is Black Lives Matter. But it's so much more than just a movement of people. It's also been ordinary people from their communities that have faced down against the police and have mobilized and have put their own bodies on the line to issue a battle cry for people around the world and around this country to join in confronting these extrajudicial killings that happen so often by police forces and other law enforcement entities inside of the United States. And I think that, you know, those of us with some gray in our beards or in our hair or full-blown white, I think it always does us good to take a humility pill and listen to young people and see where their energy is and where they're moving. I think it was a grand failure for several decades on the part of the largely white, liberal, anti-war movement not to embrace, and I'm not saying this as a chastising of every single person, but I've been around it enough to see that there has been an attitude of, well, let's invite a speaker to come to our thing and talk about what they're organizing in their communities, rather than recognizing the struggle against the prison industrial complex, poverty, and police violence as one struggle. And you know, and I often read the speeches at the end of Martin Luther King's life, where he was doing what many in the civil rights movement tried to convince him not to do, which was to draw links between race and class and the war. And you know, I think that is that should be one of the enduring legacies of Martin Luther King's time on earth, was what he spent his last years doing and saying, and I think we can learn a lot from that. But we also see that manifested in the young people that are resisting police killings. On another level, I think that it's been heartening to see how much money is poured into the American Civil Liberties Union, and I support that entirely. I would note, however, that there are groups that are working directly on the rights of immigrants in this country that are impoverished and unfamous. And you know, there are national immigrant rights coalitions that have listings of local organizations around the country, particularly in border areas in the U.S., that are very worthy of our support. And also the Center for Constitutional Rights is a severely underfunded entity, and they were the only lawyers that would take on the Guantanamo cases when Bush and Cheney started sending people there. ACLU wouldn't do it at the beginning. No one wanted to touch it. And so I would also say that supporting these kinds of organizations. But in this direct moment that we're in, I think that what infuriates the Trump administration is when there are many of us. And I think that, particularly in a community like this, with a wonderful church like this, it reminds us that sanctuary cities and sites are in the crosshairs. And I think that there is the big picture struggle of helping to fund groups that are doing this, of trying to take our lead from young people or those who have been really struggling for the rights of immigrants in this country, or immigrants themselves, in both tactics and political mobilization. But I think there is no replacement for being there. And I do think it's worthy of our time to target Democrats for not doing their job, particularly given what we're facing with the Trump administration, and doing sit-ins in their offices, targeting them with direct action. I think because they claim to be speaking the same language we do, but they don't. And so in some way, Alan Nairn said the other day, hypocrisy has its virtue, in that they want to pretend like they actually agree with this, whereas Trump will just say, kill their families. Obama will kill their families and say, oh, we didn't mean to kill their families. So, I mean, and there is a difference, and the difference is that, I don't think Obama, is some evil man at the core who takes joy in killing, any children. But he doesn't. He did it as president. And Trump will probably put an all caps tweet out celebrating that he blew the legs off of a 13-year-old. And I'm not saying that as a joke. I'm saying because I actually think that something like that could happen under him. So the targeting of Democrats, the listening to young people, the realizing that racial and immigrant struggles in this country are part of the broader anti-war struggles that I think probably a lot of people in this room come out of. And if we have pocket change, distribute it a little bit better than just ACLU, which is worthy of financing, but there are a lot of groups that have no money and operate on total volunteer budgets. And the final thing I'll say is that Allison, the work that she does is so vital for organizers. Some of you resisted the Nixon administration and operated during the Vietnam War, and you'll recall that there were FBI break-ins to steal files from anti-war groups. There was COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program, the FBI. The CIA was doing domestic spying. They wanted to get into Daniel Ellsberg's psychiatric files. What is the modern-day equivalent of all of that? It's the way that they target our mobile devices. And so anyone who is using a mobile phone or a computer for any kind of your organizing should take copious notes when Allison speaks, because it is just as vital as trying to figure out, is there an FBI informant in our mobilizing meeting? They don't even need to do that in some cases anymore, because they can go right in through the back door of whatever the weakest link is for how you're communicating. And so what Allison is doing for some of us is probably going to seem like high-end physics, but it's so vital if you take the time to understand why it's necessary. So all of those things are my thoughts on this.
It won't be as hard as physics, I promise. I'll make it as easy as I can.
There must be others who have questions.
I'm so excited that the first three people that jumped up are women to ask questions, because usually it's like some man who then speaks for an hour.
I'll answer the first question.
All right, good.
Because I've been here for 13 years. Woo! This is the 13th Catholic College of the first, and I never went all the way through. So one of the things I've been telling you, John, I'm so excited that young people are here today. That's amazing. And what I tell you, since I'm an old lady and I'm a wise woman, I tell them, stop the hour, get the heck off Twitter, and find
Well, thank you for your comments and for being here for 13 years. I hope someone brought you food here. And all right, fine. Thank you to the person who laughed at that terrible joke. In defense of Twitter, I will say this. Well, I'm also a Twitter addict, as Allison is, and other people in a way. I'm a big believer in the idea that successful organizing and effective journalism in the era that we're in right now necessitates combining the wisdom and muckraking and organizing and mobilizing and the being there that has been at the center of movements for change here and around the world with the creativity and the innovation that is largely coming from young people. If you or me, if we start yapping at young people, and I do it because I have a 16-year-old daughter, don't get off Twitter, go do something. It's basically just like, you know, why don't you cut your hair, you long hair? I mean, it's not even gonna go in one ear, it's gonna go around the entire head, and it's never gonna stop in the middle. And this is part of what I was saying before in the bigger picture. The reality is that's where they are. They are on Snapchat, they are on Instagram, they are on Twitter. Our obligation is not to tell them the way they're doing it is wrong. It's to figure out a way to communicate in their language. They are speaking a totally different language. I try to understand it. Allison is much better at it than I am. But it would be a big mistake for us to sort of say, you know, the way you're doing this is wrong, and get off of your computer and get into the streets. To me, the combination, and I do think that is part of the problem. It's not just with young people. I think a lot of people are just embedded at their computer and they feel that that's their contribution. And now there are people that can't get away from their computer for reasons of mobility and others. But real organizing and real journalism happens when you have dirt under your fingernails, and not because you've been eating Cheetos at your computer, but because you're out in the streets and you're mobilizing and you're working with others. But social media can play a very effective role for organizing and for journalism. So I embrace what you're saying and the wisdom of it. My takeaway from what you're saying is it is so important to be there, to be mobilizing, to make these issues your issues, or make an issue the thing that you're mobilizing on. But I think it would be a strategic mistake and a tactical mistake to dismiss the way in which so many young people are glued to their machines as all bad, because I think there is a lot of good if it's cultivated, and it's our job to turn them on to politics too. And part of that means actually listening to what it is that they're about. Look at the walkouts that have happened against Betsy DeVos's nomination, against Stop and Frisk. Young people are active. You know, they're just speaking a different language, and I think it's our job to go to them, not the other way around. It never works to say, well, be more like, when I was a young man, my parents wouldn't let me date someone unless they met him. I have these arguments now with a 16-year-old son, and I feel like the character on some black and white sitcom. Anyway, thank you, though, for your service. Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you for being here today.
Higher.
I feel like...
Higher mic. Just hold it.
Sorry. I feel like this mobilization that's taking place recently. I've been to several protests against family members, and I don't feel we were terribly successful. Of course, we were overruled by the Republicans, but what's your take on Neil Gorsuch?
Oh.
Neil Gorsuch.
Yeah. Trump Supreme Court nominee.
We're coming up close to lunchtime, and we have a pretty good line here, so let me ask you the questions.
I'll just give brief answers then. First of all, I don't think that you didn't succeed by protesting against these nominees. I think that I do think that because Trump is so thin-skinned in particular, I think protests affect him in a way that they didn't actually affect Obama. So I would say the more we do that, the better. And because I also think that some Republicans are going to realize what they've gotten themselves into with Trump. I don't have grand faith in them, but I think there will be a chiseling away at it. And not every Republican is in sync with this. There are some that on some issues, Justin Amash of Michigan, for instance, is terrible on a wide range of issues, but really good on some key civil liberties issues. So, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater in your hopes. And it's even if we don't stop these candidates from going forward, that by no means is a failure. It's a success that you get people to come out, and it's a moment, a teachable moment. On Gorsuch, look, it could have been a lot worse. It's bad. It's very bad. It could have been a lot worse. It could have been Ted Cruz, and it may be Ted Cruz if he gets another one, or it could have been, you know, Milo Yiannopoulos or the neo-Nazi Richard Spencer who got punched twice and cried. But I mean, it could have been
3 times. You got punched.
Oh, 3. I got. Oh, yeah, that's right. The 3rd time. It could have been a lot worse. On some issues, on search and seizure and civil liberties, Gorsuch has a complicated record. There are some indications that he is not going to be a rubber stamp for Trump. I think that leak the other day of what Gorsuch said about Trump, I think he did say it about Trump. I think he was reflecting his actual opinion. So I'd be curious to know why Trump chose him, because I think, you know, Gorsuch is clearly a grand opponent of a woman's right to choose, which was the main litmus test for this position. But they did somehow pick someone that I think is less horrifying than others that they could have picked. That's not a very uplifting message. I'm just telling you what my analysis is of it from friends that cover this stuff seriously. Okay, yes, go ahead, sorry.
Jeremy, I'm just absolutely thrilled I'm here. And
I am too,
I worked
that you are.
Dirty Wars, and anybody who hasn't seen your movie Dirty Wars has got to come home and see it. It is absolutely, I've had so much respect for Barack Obama at one time. I went out to Keene, New Hampshire, you know, waited for 4 hours in a snowstorm, read and listened to the books on tape, and all my respect was completely gone after watching Dirty Wars. So I want to thank you for that. My question is, I'm a nonviolence trainer, have been my whole life, nonviolence and body rights, speech and action, and I get concerned about the type of demonstrations that I'm seeing that are not nonviolence. There doesn't seem to be too many people out there teaching the way John Lewis used to teach and Martin Luther King.
Yep.
You know, and that concerns me. So I recently have been involved with the Pinelands Preservation Alliance. We're trying to get South Jersey Gas pipeline not to be in Pinelands. And everybody who meets in Cherry Hill and February 24th, 1,000 people we need. 1,000 people.
Get 2,000.
Yeah, we can only go 1,000.
Okay, never mind.
But
I get.
concerned about.
No, I know exactly what you're talking about. Just in the interest of time, yeah, I was in D.C. at the inauguration, and you know, there were people operating under the banner of Antifa, or, you know, anti-fascists. In other points and movements in history, people have referred to it as the Black Bloc or Black Bloc protests. And you know, I think that it gets into complicated territory when we start policing the tactics of people that are resisting. However, I've seen numerous cases where, you know, the people that are there throwing the garbage can through the Starbucks and, you know, throwing things at police, and often police start with firing tear gas and rubber bullets. I actually have a rubber bullet in my pocket that it's still in there from DC. I got hit in the leg with a rubber bullet at the demonstrations. They go after people with cameras a lot of the time. It makes it unsafe for instance, undocumented people, people with families to be at those demonstrations. And so on a tactical level, I think it's not a wise tactic if the point is to build a broader movement. But I do hesitate to join in the chorus of condemnation, because I think that there's this equating of the people that do that with state violence of the police, which I think is just a non-issue. You can't compare the two. And also the idea that people espousing neo-Nazi or fascist points of view, that people don't have a right to confront them by any means necessary, that somehow this just boils down to a question of free speech in the First Amendment, I think it totally doesn't take into account history. So I think that my position on it probably is similar to yours, in the sense that I think it's self-defeating in many cases. But if you look at, for instance, the response in Los Angeles following the Rodney King verdict, which some people, including some colleagues of mine, have sort of tried to compare to the Berkeley protests against Milo Yiannopoulos from Breitbart, it's a ridiculous comparison. Martin Luther King, talked about riots being the language of the oppressed, and he went on to also have an analysis about the lack of wisdom involved with some of those tactics. But it's a complicated thing, and I think Martin Luther King recognized that, and I think that's why he said it. And I go back to something I said much earlier. I do think, though, that if you are talking about a spontaneous revolt to a police killing or the verdict where they let cops go after killing police, anybody who has a problem with what people are doing, I think has a moral obligation then to go and stand among those people, and not just during the protest, but like see what their life is like. So to me, there is no clear answer on this. On a tactical level, I agree with you, but in a time of such horrid state-organized violence, my priority isn't going after the Black Bloc kids or Antifa. Why don't we take... and thank you for the work you're doing. Maybe we can just take the next 3 people quickly, and then we... one in a row, and then I'll just take it in one, as one.
Hi, I'm a retired public school teacher, very much involved in public education. I want to make sure you're aware of something, even if you are with your comments about. Are you aware that Betsy DeVos's husband, Richard DeVos, is the founder and head of a charter school in Michigan, which is training students to be pilots and airplane mechanics? It's the West Michigan Aviation Charter School. Given that Eric Prince is her brother, it's not too much of a stretch to say that they are training people to be in Air Force for his mercenary army that he has created. Are you aware of this, and what do you think about what I just said?
Okay, let the next guy. I noted it, and I'll answer. I'm gonna take 3, and then I'll answer them in a row.
Hi there. You briefly mentioned the Democratic Socialists of America. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to what they are, how they fit into this.
I'm representing the Coalition for Peace Action in Princeton, New Jersey. My comment, the question about the comment is, the administration is saying that Iran is the greatest threat to world peace. I think in a lot of our views, the coalition, the United States, we've killed over 20 million people since World War II. And unfortunately, blowback is increasing day, drone killings, the slaughter. And I think the other comment is, if we're worried about death in this country, why don't we do something about gun control? The fact that about 80% of the population have guns, and there are thousands more deaths from domestic firearm killings than ever from terrorists.
Thank you for being a real journalist. It seems as if journalism is dead. It seems like a great divide started almost with the onset of Fox News. But with that said, do you have hope for real journalism to come back?
All right, I'll take these quickly. Regarding Betsy DeVos, I was aware that Dick DeVos is behind that charter school that you cited. I actually, in the book I wrote, Blackwater, I did quite a bit of research on the DeVos family, and Betsy marrying Eric Prince was like a merger of 2 extreme right-wing families, like the monarchies of old Europe, and they really were at the center of the financial center of creating what is now known as the radical religious right and financing the Republican Revolution, and all of them very close to Mike Pence, as is Eric Prince, the creator of Blackwater, who is an advisor, a secret advisor to Donald Trump. I don't think that the pilot training operation is directly related to Eric Prince. I think it's a pure profit thing. Eric Prince's priority now is largely in Africa, and I think that he is exploring and exploiting an economic model where he's using cheap labor as mercenary forces, and his business is being run out of China right now, and he has deep connections to Chinese state intelligence, which is quite ironic given Trump's stance on China. But those families, to your point, should be monitored constantly for where they're going and what they're doing, because they are at the center of so many dangerous things. Democratic Socialists of America, I'm not a historian on it, but This is Michael Harrington. It was around for, it's been around for many, many years and has been largely unknown or non-entity in terms of actual organized electoral politics. However, I do think that there's a big surge in interest of Democratic Socialists of America among millennials and young people. And I'm all about anything that gets people turned on to politics and politics of justice and something that is not just the establishment Democratic Party. And I would say that they're a group that I've started really watching and listening to what they say. Also, Jacobin magazine is, I did a forum with them. I don't agree with everything Jacobin writes, but it's a very interesting publication that is engaged in a provocative debate about, what the role of young people is in the political society that we live in. And I would just recommend looking at their website to make your own conclusions. Regarding Iran being the greatest threat to world peace, I mean, it's an obnoxious, outrageous, flagrantly false statement. When Mike Flynn came out in front of the Washington press corps, first of all, he looked drunk. It was like an Al Haig, I'm in charge moment. He then openly either conflated, or unintentionally or intentionally, actions of the Yemeni Houthi forces in Yemen with the Iranian military to justify this. Iran is being put on notice. I said many, many months ago that one of the major differences between Trump and Hillary on foreign policy was that Trump's people are really ideological pushers of the idea that the United States should be at war with Iran. And I think it's one of the most grave possibilities of this administration. And I think it would be an utter disaster on so many levels that we would need an entire evening to discuss it. I agree with you on guns in this country. I mean, it's unconscionable that this is allowed to continue. And if we want to talk about the profiling of people, why aren't they rounding up disillusioned, disaffected, unstable young white men who are going into schools and doing so many of these shootings? It was despicable that the Democrats tried to link gun purchases to the terrorist watch list. It was just like they have no clue of what the majority of firearms deaths in this country stem from. The idea that the biggest threat from the proliferation of firearms in this country is going to come from ISIS is just ahistorical nonsense. And it was shameful that the Democrats embraced that horribly repressive watch list system as some kind of a condition to buy a gun. If you're on the watch list, you can't buy a gun. Dylan Roof was not on the watch list. The guy who shot up the movie theater was not on the watch list that murdered all of the children in the school multiple times over, or Virginia. And none of these people are on the watch list. And even when people are on the watch list, they don't seem to catch them because they're flooded with people's names on the watch list and they can't figure out who actually is a threat. So to me, the Second Amendment issue, the Democrats have become law and order people about this stuff, and I think it contributes to the kind of glorification also of the military. We love our guns, we love our soldiers, our CIA is great. We need to really have a discussion in this country about how the big guns that we use around the world encourage the proliferation of the little guns, but also just on a direct level. These school shootings have to stop, and the only way to stop them is to stop guns from getting into the hands of all sorts of people. Hopeful real journalism. I actually feel much more hopeful now than I have in many, many years, and not because Chuck Todd occasionally asks like a real question, which I don't recommend watching him if you're looking for real journalism, but the fact that the Trump administration is in an open war against not only journalists, specifically fake news, CNN, fake, sad, failing New York Times, he's at war against the idea of a free press, of the First Amendment, and the way that they have masterfully used his Twitter feed to not dog whistle, but like dog siren about racism and the idea that the 3 million people were cast fraudulent votes, and this projecting of just we feel these things are true has become the truth for so many people that follow Trump. And I think that if you look at the surge in donations to ProPublica, to the Marshall Project, if you look at the number of leaks that are coming out of the Trump administration right now, this is a time where the mettle of journalism is going to be tested in this country. And I think that the monopoly on the dissemination of information that powerful news organizations once held has been almost shattered. And that's why I think supporting, we always would say, oh, well, you got to support independent media. And I've always believed that. But right now it really, really is like an emergency to support independent news organizations. I continue to just be so thankful that there is an Amy Goodman and that there is a Democracy Now! But there are also a lot of other organizations that have like no money and are doing really great work, particularly on issues of race, class, and immigration. And later we can talk about what some of those are, and I can maybe try to help you guys come up with the list that you're talking about. But yes, I'm very hopeful right now, more hopeful than I've been in probably 20 years.
First of all, I just want to say I have a smartphone every week, and I just want to say that being on the internet and being on the world are not like how three states can be, because I've been basically educated while I was here. So, and that's actually how I...
And your workshop will be later on this afternoon. The two of you can do a workshop together.
And that's how I found out about the protests that were happening in the airports, and I actually brought my Republican husband with me. So, anyhow, I really want to thank you for your comments on the Democrats. I've been at that point for a long time, in terms of particularly Democrats in New Jersey really buying a corporate agenda. And I've been really frustrated recently as now the New Jersey Democrats protesting with a group of people outside the detention center in Elizabeth for almost 10 years now, and our largest crowd was like 200 people. In the past 2 weeks, we had 1,000 people there, and every single, I'm not really happy about that, because we had every single Democrat who's running for governor next year showed up. All of a sudden, they know where it is. And we had 1,000 people because one of the progressive Democratic groups put out their list that they should all drive from Maplewood and Jersey City and come to this place that they didn't know existed. And they never mentioned why they were sitting there. So, and the other thing that happened was Donald Payne Jr. had an event where he called together all the faith leaders to talk about Donald Trump's executive order, but he was a freeholder. He signed on to expand immigration detention twofold in New Jersey. So, and I couldn't go to that event even though I was invited because I couldn't deal with my anger. So, can you help? Like, what can I do with all of that? I know I can sorry.
Okay, yeah, go ahead. We'll take the last things and then I'll do it again in order and then we can eat.
Hi. I want to think about... Hi, can you hear me? I have a couple of thoughts. One is when I think about these acts of violence at our rallies, I'm wondering if maybe they're false flag operations, sort of like the COINTELPRO operation, in which certain people are paid by the Trump administration or by Fox News or whoever just to create a violent act just so they can show it on their media, and that they're really not really
Yeah, I get it.
us.
I get it. I'll answer that.
Yeah. And the second thing is that since corporate Democrats, do you think corporate Democrats are now weak enough that we can push Gene Ellison as the DNC chair and make Bernie Sanders the face of the Democratic Party?
You referenced Al Haig, I remind you, November '69, after the massive Vietnam protests in Washington, a reporter asked him what difference it will make, and he said they could march all they want as long as they continue paying taxes. That's, I think, both literal and figurative. But that relates to I have a little discomfort, not with the word resistance itself, but how the people use it now, and how suddenly, it's on the cover of the New York Times magazine tomorrow. I've become moves from a serious understanding of what resistance might entail to sort of a fashionable, as our culture does. Let's do it.
All right, last one and then we'll...
We are the evolutionary forefront of a new world of peace and justice. They are trying to keep us back. So just think about that. They're on our coattails. So it's very important for me to understand, is this leadership, is their ambition only for sacred money and markets, or do they actually have an ideological connection to Jesus and the faith in this corrupt sort of practice that they're perpetrating?
The only real thing that I have to say, I think I'm being told that we're going to come back, and there will be more time later. Yeah. To the first woman who spoke about first of all, thank you for your activism and your steadfastness in being there. I think there is a strategic alliance that can be made with certain pools of the Democratic Party. What's interesting is that when the massive demonstration was mobilized in New York the day after Trump's ban caused these, standoffs at the airports, Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand spoke at the rally alongside very radical immigrant rights advocates and undocumented people, and Schumer basically had to stop because he got booed by a massive crowd of people. And I think it was interesting. Some people were saying, "Oh, you're being disrespectful to Schumer." I actually think it's good for Schumer to get a dose of reality sometimes. And I think that, if there's a strategic value to coalition building, even with people that are Kool-Aid, drinkers or like really believe that Hillary Clinton was like the candidate, which I don't actually know anyone that really, I don't think those people, well, anyway, never mind. But I do think there's a strategic value to it. The point, though, is that never let them tell you what can and can't be said at those mobilizations, and never be afraid to call them out on the same stage where you are if they're part of the problem. But I do think there is a value, particularly in times like this, and this happened during Bush too, in taking all hands on deck that really want to be on deck. The danger is that the Democratic Party has a PhD in co-opting movements into their electoral political strategy, and we saw that in 2004 with John Kerry's campaign, and we certainly saw it in 2008 and 2012 with Barack Obama. And part of it, requires people to be willing to be kind of led into a slumber during the times when Democrats are in power. But some of it too is that the Democratic Party wants to suck that energy up and figure out a way to commodify it for their own agenda. The idea of false flags with the black blocs, do I think Trump is paying them? No. Or Fox News? No. What I do know is that, for instance, in 1999 in Seattle, the FBI was paying young African-American men to go and smash Nike Town, for instance, and we talked to several of the kids that were doing it, and they said that somebody gave us $100 and told us to just go and start smashing the windows at Nike Town. This was during the WTO uprisings. That does happen, and I think that part of the point of that is to create a more intense crisis between people who are using those tactics and people who are nonviolent, but also to smear the entirety of the protesters as being property destroyers and smashers of things. And but you have to be really careful about hurling those allegations because most of the people that are out there are there because they are against capitalism, or they're against the war, or they're against Trump. And I think that engaging in conversation is a much more effective, and having these debates is a much more effective tool than just blanket accusing people, which you weren't doing, sir, but of being provocateurs. Because I think that feeds into the government narrative, but it does exist, and we have to figure out ways of weeding that out, and it's part of why I'm looking forward to hearing Allison. First of all, Keith Ellison, who I love dearly as a person and have known for many years, you know, he's slowly sidestepping to the center of, you know, the Democratic